moment my son set that folder of papers on my kitchen table and told me to sign before the notary left, I did not raise my voice. I did not push the folder back. I sat very still in the chair I have sat in for 31 years and looked at my son, really looked at him, and thought, he has forgotten about the lockbox. My wife was 40 miles away in a hospital bed, 2 days into a recovery from a procedure her cardiologist had scheduled weeks in advance. She was fine. She would be home by Thursday. But my son had known the date of her procedure for 3 weeks, and he had chosen this particular Tuesday morning to arrive at my door with his wife, a notary public, and an attorney I had never met. I noticed the timing. I noticed most things. Let me tell you about the land first, because without the land, none of this makes sense. I bought 12 acres in the foothills of western North Carolina in the spring of 1991 when I was 38 years old and had just spent 16 years working as a master carpenter and general contractor across 3 states. The land cost me $42,000, which was most of what I had. The house on it was a shell, no insulation, no interior walls, electrical that hadn't been touched since 1964, a foundation that needed a third of its blocks replaced. My wife looked at it the day we signed and said, "It's a ruin." I said, "Not for long." It took me 4 years of evenings and weekends to make it livable. Another 3 to make it right. I built the back workshop from scratch, poured the slab myself, framed it myself, ran the electrical conduit myself. I am not the kind of man who hires out what he can do with his own hands. My wife painted every room twice. We planted the apple trees together in the fall of '94, 18 of them in 2 rows along the lower pasture. And we stood back in the cold and looked at those bare sticks in the ground, and she laughed because they looked like absolutely nothing, and I told her to wait 20 years. She waited. They are magnificent now. My son grew up in that house. He knows every board of that workshop floor, every window I replaced, every stone on the fireplace I rebuilt after the original chimney cracked in the freeze of 2002. He helped me lay those stones. He was 14 years old, and I taught him how to set mortar and check for plumb, and he learned well enough. And I thought, the way fathers always think, that the work of your hands passes into your children, along with some knowledge of how hard that work was. I was wrong about that. Or I was right about it once and stopped being right somewhere around the time he married my daughter-in-law. She is a real estate agent. She has been since before they met. She is very good at her job, which I mean as a neutral observation, not a compliment. She looks at land the way a surgeon looks at a body, as a system of components with measurable values and exploitable angles. She started coming to holidays about 9 years ago, and I noticed the way she walked through my house. Not the way a guest walks through, curious and a little deferential, but the way a person walks through a space they are already calculating. Touching door frames, looking at ceiling heights, standing in the kitchen and staring out at the acreage with an expression that had nothing to do with the view. My wife noticed it too. She mentioned it to me once, quietly, after a Thanksgiving where my daughter-in-law had spent 40 minutes at the dinner table talking about land valuations in the county. My wife said, "She's not interested in us, you know." I said I knew. We didn't talk about it again for a long time, but it was there between us the way some things are. Present without being spoken, heavy without being named. The push started about 3 years ago, and it started gently, which is how pushes always start when someone is patient and certain they're smarter than the person they're pushing. My son began calling more often. He asked about my health. He asked about the workshop. He started driving up from Charlotte on weekends he had never driven up before, bringing good bourbon and thick steaks and being the son I remembered from, before the ambition settled into him and changed the temperature of everything. My daughter-in-law started talking about assisted living communities. Not suggesting, just mentioning. Did we know there was a lovely one near Asheville? Had we thought about what would happen if one of us needed more care than the other could provide? She always said these things in a warm voice, with her head tilted slightly to the side, the way people tilt their heads when they want to look like they're worried about you. My son talked about property taxes. He talked about maintenance costs and the expense of heating 12 acres of hillside on a fixed income. He used the phrase, the responsible thing, more times than I could count. He said a piece of property like mine, in a county like this, in a market like this, and then he trailed off and let the silence hold the number he wouldn't say, knowing I could fill it in. I could fill it in. The county assessor had valued the property at just over $800,000 the previous spring. I was not unaware of this figure. I was also not unaware of the fact that my son had borrowed $85,000 from me 12 years ago, when his contracting business collapsed in the bad years that followed 2008, and he couldn't make payroll and called me at 11 o'clock on a winter Wednesday night, his voice thin and frightened, the voice of the 14-year-old boy laying stones at my fireplace. I had the money because I had always lived carefully. I gave it to him. He asked me how he could ever repay me, and I told him exactly what I wanted in return. What I wanted was simple and legally documented. I wanted a notarized agreement, drafted by my attorney, a woman named Catherine Webb, who had handled my affairs for 18 years at that point, stating that the $85,000 constituted an advance against any future inheritance, and that my son was formally waiving any claim to the real property at my address. He signed it without reading it carefully. People in crisis often don't read carefully. That is not my problem. My problem at the time was helping my son keep his business, which I did, and he has run it successfully ever since. I had not reminded him of the document in 12 years. I kept a certified copy in a fireproof lockbox in my workshop, behind a false panel I built into the north wall of the tool cabinet in 1999. A cavity 8 inches deep and 14 inches wide, flush with the surrounding wood, sealed with a friction fit panel that you would only locate if you knew exactly where to look. The box also contained, as of 2 years ago, a recorded deed showing the property held in an irrevocable trust that Catherine and I had restructured quietly when I began to understand what my daughter-in-law was planning. The trust named my wife as primary beneficiary and a land conservation organization as secondary. My son was not in it anywhere. I had told my wife about the trust restructuring. I had not told her about the lockbox or the waiver document. I told myself it was because I didn't want her carrying the weight of it, spending her days bracing for a confrontation that might not come. The truth, if I am honest with myself, is that I also wanted the moment of it to be mine. I am 69 years old, and I have spent most of my life building things designed to hold. I wanted one clean moment of watching the thing I had built do exactly that. They arrived at 9 in the morning. My son came in first, then my daughter-in-law, then a man I did not know who introduced himself as a real estate attorney from Charlotte and shook my hand with the particular confidence of someone who has driven 2 hours and expects the morning to go a certain way. The notary came in last, a young woman with a leather case who looked politely uncomfortable, the way notaries look when they sense the proceedings are about money and not much else. My daughter-in-law had the folder. She set it on my kitchen table, the table I built from a walnut slab in 1993, the one my wife has eaten breakfast at every single morning since. And she opened it and began explaining what she called the plan. The plan was a full deed transfer of the property to my son, with a life-use clause that would ostensibly allow my wife and me to remain on the land until we died. The attorney, his name was Fowler, backed her up with smooth competence, explaining the tax advantages, the estate planning benefits, the wisdom of acting before something happened to one of us. His tone was the tone of a man explaining arithmetic to someone he believes cannot do arithmetic. I listened to all of it, without interrupting. When they finished, I said I needed a moment, and I stood up and walked through the back door to my workshop. I heard my daughter-in-law say something to my son in a low voice as I stepped outside. I couldn't make out the words. It did not matter. The workshop was cool and quiet and smelled of sawdust and linseed oil the way it always does in October. The smell that means the season is changing and the wood is behaving differently and you have to adjust. I went to the tool cabinet on the north wall. I opened the left-hand door. I reached behind the fixed shelf to the friction fit panel and pressed it at the correct angle and heard the soft click of it releasing, the same click it had made every time I tested it over the years, which was exactly 4 times. The lockbox was where I left it. The phone I kept alongside it, a backup prepaid charged every 6 months, was where I left it too. I carried the box to the workbench and opened it. I removed 2 documents, the certified copy of the trust deed and the notarized waiver from 12 years ago. Then I walked back inside. Fowler was still speaking when I came through the kitchen door. He stopped when I set the 2 documents on the table. I said quietly that before anyone proceeded further, I wanted him, not my son, him, the attorney, to read both documents, professionally. He looked at my daughter-in-law. She looked at the papers with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Something careful and recalculating, the expression of someone who has stepped onto ice they believed was solid and felt it shift beneath their weight. Fowler picked up the waiver document first. He read it. He read it a second time. The kitchen was very quiet. My son watched the attorney's face the way you watch a doctor's face when they are reading a result you did not expect. Fowler set the waiver down and picked up the trust deed. He read that one more slowly. When he finished, he was still for a moment. Then he closed my daughter-in-law's folder and set it to one side with a deliberateness that said everything before he said a word. He said, and I will remember exactly how he said this. Sir, I have to advise my clients that I cannot proceed with this transaction. My daughter-in-law said, What? He said the property was held in an irrevocable trust that precluded transfer by deed. He said the waiver document, if valid, and it appeared to be notarized, witnessed, and recorded, substantially complicated any inheritance claim against the estate. He said he needed to speak with his clients privately, and he said it the way attorneys say things when they are trying to be calm about something that is not calm. My son had not spoken since I came back from the workshop. He was looking at the waiver on the table with the expression of a man, reading something he had genuinely allowed himself to forget. He had signed it in crisis. He had paid it no further thought. He had remembered the $85,000 without remembering what it cost. I went out to the workshop and called Catherine. She answered on the first ring, because I had called her the previous evening, and told her I believed Tuesday would be the day, and asked her to keep her phone close. She told me the trust was airtight. She told me she'd had the waiver reviewed by a colleague 2 years ago, the same week I first brought her my concerns, and that colleague had confirmed it was fully enforceable. She told me she had a cease and desist drafted and had been waiting for my instruction on where to send it. I gave her Fowler's name. She found his firm in under a minute. When I came back inside, Fowler was sitting apart from my son and daughter-in-law. He was looking at his phone. He looked up and said, I want to be transparent with you. I was retained to facilitate what my clients represented as an uncomplicated estate planning matter. I was given no information about either of these documents. He paused. I need to assess what I may be obligated to report. My daughter-in-law said, This is a family matter. You don't need to report anything. Fowler said, Ma'am, I'm a licensed attorney in North Carolina. I'll make that determination myself. She went quiet. My son kept looking at the waiver document, the way a man looks at something he thought he had buried long enough to disappear. The notary excused herself and left. Fowler made a call in the driveway. My son and daughter-in-law sat across from me at my kitchen table, and nobody said anything worth remembering for a long stretch of time. Eventually, my son looked up. His face held the particular expression of someone caught not in a lie he invented, but in one he had permitted himself to believe long enough that it began to feel like the truth. He said, I didn't think that document was still. And then he stopped. I said, It was always still. He didn't say anything after that. Fowler came back inside and informed my son and daughter-in-law that he was withdrawing from the representation effective immediately, citing the undisclosed encumbrances on the property and the existence of the waiver agreement as material facts his clients had not disclosed. He noted he would be contacting his state bar's ethics line as a precaution. He shook my hand when he left. He did not shake theirs. Catherine filed the cease and desist with both their addresses by early afternoon. She also filed a formal inquiry with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission regarding my daughter-in-law's involvement in coordinating a property transfer attempt that she, as a licensed agent, had reason to know was encumbered by documents she had not disclosed to the attorney she retained. That inquiry triggered a review. 6 months after that Tuesday morning, my daughter-in-law's real estate license was suspended pending a full investigation. The suspension, as far as I am aware, has not been lifted. My son did not face criminal charges. I will say this plainly because I think honesty requires it. He and my daughter-in-law settled the civil fraud suit Catherine filed 14 months later, and the settlement cost them considerably more than they expected, but it was not what I felt the situation warranted. The legal system is a structure with load tolerances, and sometimes the weight you expect it to carry it only partially holds. I have made my peace with that, more or less, though it did not happen quickly. My wife came home on a Thursday afternoon in October. The light on the hillside that time of year comes through the apple trees at an angle that turns everything amber and still. She walked out onto the back porch while I was getting her bag from the car, and she stood looking at the trees in the workshop and the 12 acres of mountain foothills that various people had spent 3 years telling us we couldn't manage on our own. She turned around when I came up the porch steps. She has known my face for 40 years. She looked at it and said, "Tell me." I told her everything. The waiver, the trust restructuring, the Tuesday morning, Fowler's face when he read the papers, all of it. She was quiet through most of it. When I finished, she sat down in the porch chair and looked out at the apple trees for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You've been carrying this for 2 years." I said, "I didn't want you worrying." She said, "I've been worrying for 2 years anyway. I just didn't have anything to point at." I thought about that for a while. It is the most accurate description of the last 3 years of our marriage that I can offer. We were both quietly bracing for the same thing and trying to protect each other from knowing it, which meant we each carried it alone when we didn't have to. She was not angry. I had expected some anger. She has strong convictions, and I had kept things from her. Instead, she reached over and put her hand on mine. Her hands have been cold for years, since her circulation started giving her trouble. Cold and certain, the same way they've been since her 60s. She said, "You built a lot of things on this property." I said, "Most of them." She said, "I want to know where all the rest of them are." So we spent a Sunday afternoon in November going through it together. The trust documents, the waiver, the updated will, the full contents of the lockbox. We sat at the kitchen table, and I spread everything out and walked her through each piece. She asked exact, careful questions, the kind she has always asked, the questions of a woman who never received enough credit for how clearly she sees. When we finished, she made tea and we sat by the fire, and she said she wanted to send our son a letter. I did not try to stop her. I did not ask to read it. She is better at that kind of communication than I am. She always has been. He did not write back, not in the months that followed. I noticed this the way I notice structural failures. Not with shock, but with the quiet acknowledgement of a person who has been watching for the signs long enough that the arrival of what you feared does not surprise you, only settles in the chest like something cold and expected. There is a photograph on the bookshelf in the living room of my son at 11 years old, standing in the unfinished workshop, holding a framing hammer and grinning at the camera because he had just driven his first nail straight without bending it. He looks so pleased with himself. He should be. It takes more patience than most children have to let a hammer do what it's supposed to do instead of forcing it. I look at that photograph some mornings when I walk past, and I think about the fact that both things are true at the same time. That boy existed and is part of the man my son became, and the man my son became did what he did. I don't know how to weigh those things against each other. I'm not sure they're meant to balance. I think you carry both of them, and you keep walking. I walk the property every morning now before my wife wakes up. Through the workshop, around the apple trees, down to the lower fence line where the pasture meets the tree line, back up through the yard to the porch. I put my hands on things. It is an old habit, the habit of a builder, who trusts his own work but also understands that trust and certainty are not the same thing, and that the only way to know a structure is holding is to put your hands on it regularly and feel for what has changed. Everything holds. That is the short version of this story. It is also the most important version. Catherine told me, when I described what I intended to do with the portion of the civil settlement that exceeded our legal costs, that she had never had a client respond to attempted fraud by immediately funding a financial literacy program for seniors in their county. I told her that was probably because most of her clients had not spent 4 decades building things specifically designed to outlast the people who might want to take them apart. She laughed. She is a good attorney. More than that, she is the kind of person who picks up on the first ring when it matters, and in my experience, that is the rarer quality. The workshop is still standing. So is the house. So are the apple trees, bare in winter but alive the way dormant trees are alive. Not diminished, just waiting for the season to turn again and say it is time. My wife drinks her coffee by the east window every morning. I built that window in 1997, cut the original opening bigger on a Saturday afternoon, with a reciprocating saw while she stood in the yard and told me if I was drifting offline. We have been doing things that way for a long time. She watches. I cut. She tells me when I'm going crooked. What I know now that I want to say plainly, real security is not the absence of threat. I know this better than most people my age. Real security is everything you put in the right place before the threat arrives. The document signed in a crisis and filed and forgotten by the person who signed it, but never forgotten by you. The trust restructured quietly while no one was asking why. The panel built into the wall, not because you were afraid, but because you were paying attention. Real security is the habit of a builder who understands that the structures that hold longest are the ones built with the knowledge that someday someone or something will test them. They thought they knew this property. They thought they had timed it perfectly, right down to the day my wife was away and the table was set, and the notary was in the room, and all that was left was an old man's signature. They forgot that I built this place. Board by board, stone by stone, document by document, year after patient year, and everything I build to last.